Sometimes the most valuable thing a person leaves behind isn't worth a single dollar until you discover the truth hidden beneath it. Mason Hale had heard plenty of strange things during his years as a Navy SEAL, but nothing felt stranger than sitting alone in a lawyer's office staring at a document that claimed his late wife had left him a flower cabin worth nearly $8 million. The numbers meant nothing to him at first. They were just ink on paper. What mattered was the empty chair beside him. Emily had been gone for 3 weeks, and the silence she left behind followed him everywhere. Across the room, people whispered. Real estate agents, investors, distant relatives he barely recognized. Everyone seemed fascinated by the property, everyone except Mason. At 62 years old, he had learned that money rarely fixed the things that actually hurt. At his feet lay Gunnar, his loyal German shepherd. The dog rested quietly, his head on his paws, amber eyes following every movement in the room. Since Emily's passing, Gunnar had barely left Mason's side. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and slid another folder across the polished table. "Your wife was very specific," he said. "The flower cabin belongs solely to you." Mason nodded without speaking. The lawyer hesitated before reaching into the folder one final time. "There's also this." He placed a sealed envelope on top of the paperwork. Mason immediately recognized Emily's handwriting. His chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. "She requested that only you read it," the lawyer explained. The conversations around them seemed to fade away. Mason picked up the envelope carefully. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingers. For a moment, he simply stared at her name written across the front. Emily Hale, the woman who had spent 37 years beside him. The woman who somehow managed to bring peace to a man who had spent most of his life preparing for conflict. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no long farewell. No explanation, just one sentence written in neat blue ink. "Don't trust anyone who comes for the cabin." Mason read the words again, then a third time. His brow furrowed. Across the room, one of the investors was already speaking excitedly about future development opportunities. Another relative smiled while discussing market value. $8 million. Yet Emily's message had nothing to do with money. "Don't trust anyone who comes for the cabin." Gunnar suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood upright. The dog stared toward the office window, his posture changing instantly. Alert, focused, watching something Mason couldn't see. Mason followed his gaze but found nothing unusual. Just afternoon sunlight reflecting off parked cars below. Still, Gunnar remained locked on the view outside. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, are you all right?" Mason folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "No," he answered honestly. "I don't think I am." An hour later, he and Gunnar were driving north toward the mountains, where the flower cabin waited among fields of wild roses and old cedar trees. Emily had visited the place alone for years. Now Mason found himself wondering why. As the truck climbed the winding road, Gunnar remained unusually restless. Then, just as the cabin finally appeared, beyond a hill covered in flowers, the German shepherd rose from his seat and began staring at a single dead rose bush near the front porch. The moment the truck stopped, Gunnar jumped out and ran straight toward it. Gunnar reached the dead rose bush before Mason could even close the truck door. The German shepherd circled it once, nose pressed to the ground, then began scratching at the soil with unusual urgency. Mason walked over slowly. "Easy, boy. What is it?" Gunnar ignored him and continued digging. The rest of the garden was overflowing with color. Red roses, white roses, yellow roses. Acres of carefully maintained flowers stretched across the hillside. Yet this single bush stood dead and gray in the middle of all that beauty. Mason crouched beside it and brushed loose dirt aside. Nothing, just roots and hard ground. "You brought me all the way over here for a dead plant?" he asked with a tired smile. Gunnar stopped digging and looked directly at him. Then the dog turned toward the cabin and let out a short bark. Mason knew that bark. Gunnar was not asking, he was insisting. The cabin itself looked untouched by time. White wooden walls, green shutters, a wraparound porch facing the mountains. Emily had always called it her peaceful place. Yet standing there now, Mason felt something different. The place did not feel peaceful. It felt watchful, as if it had been waiting for him. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The scent of cedar and dried flowers filled the air. Everything looked exactly as Emily had left it. A knitted blanket rested on the couch. Books sat neatly on shelves. A ceramic mug remained beside the fireplace. Mason stopped moving. For a second, it felt like she might walk into the room at any moment. "You always did leave the place cleaner than me," he said quietly. Gunnar wandered through the living room, sniffing corners. His tail remained stiff. He was searching for something. Mason moved toward the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Empty. Then he checked the pantry. Also empty except for a single glass jar containing dried lavender. Something caught his eye beneath it. A folded note. He picked it up immediately. His pulse quickened. The handwriting belonged to Emily. There were only 3 words. "Not here." Mason frowned. "Not here," he repeated. "What does that even mean?" Gunnar suddenly barked from the hallway. Mason followed him. The dog stood beside a closed door at the end of the corridor. The greenhouse, Emily's private flower room, the one place she never allowed anyone to rearrange. Mason reached for the handle. Locked. That is strange. He tried again. Still locked. Gunnar whined softly and pressed his nose against the bottom of the door. "You think whatever she meant is in there?" Mason asked. The dog immediately barked once. Before Mason could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed outside. Both man and dog froze. A black SUV slowly rolled into the driveway. The vehicle stopped near the porch. A well-dressed man stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He smiled the moment he saw Mason. "Mr. Hale," the stranger called. "I have been looking for you. My clients would like to make an offer on the property." Mason glanced at the locked greenhouse door, then back toward the window. The man was smiling, but for some reason, Gunnar began growling low in his throat, and for the first time since arriving, Mason remembered Emily's warning. "Do not trust anyone who comes for the cabin." The man waited beside the black SUV with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Mason stepped onto the porch while Gunnar remained at his side, his attention fixed on the stranger. The man extended his hand. "Richard Sloan. I represent a private investment group." Mason glanced at the hand but did not shake it. "What can I do for you?" Sloan smiled politely. "Actually, I was hoping to ask what we can do for you. My clients are prepared to offer $10 million for this property immediately." Mason looked at him for a moment. "You drove all the way up here to offer $10 million for a flower cabin." Sloan chuckled softly. "The land is valuable. The location is unique. Opportunities like this do not come often." Gunnar let out a low growl. Sloan glanced at the dog. "Friendly fellow." "He usually is," Mason replied. "Then perhaps he knows something I do not." The smile never left Sloan's face, but something about the comment felt rehearsed. Mason folded his arms. "I just inherited the place. I am not interested in selling." "Not interested today," Sloan corrected. "But maybe tomorrow." He reached into his briefcase and handed Mason a business card. "Think about it." Mason took the card without looking at it. Sloan turned toward his SUV. Before getting inside, he paused. "One more thing." Mason waited. "Your wife was a remarkable woman." The statement caught him off guard. "Did you know Emily?" Sloan hesitated for the briefest second. "Everyone in this county knew about her gardens." Then he climbed into the vehicle and drove away. Mason watched until the SUV disappeared down the winding road. Gunnar continued staring after it long after the vehicle was gone. "I do not like him either," Mason muttered. Back inside, he sat at the kitchen table and studied the business card. There was no company logo, no address, just a phone number. "That is strange." Gunnar suddenly trotted toward the living room. A moment later came the sound of something falling. Mason followed him. The dog stood beside an old bookshelf near the fireplace. One of the books had fallen onto the floor. Mason picked it up. It was not a book at all. It was a photo album disguised with a fake cover. His pulse quickened. Emily had always hidden important things in unexpected places. He sat down and opened it carefully. Most of the photographs showed gardens, flowers, and mountain trails. Then he reached a section that made him stop. The pictures were different. Emily stood beside people he did not recognize. Some appeared worried. Others looked frightened. None were smiling. "Who are these people?" he whispered. Tucked between 2 pages was a folded receipt dated 6 months earlier. On the back, Emily had written another note. "If anyone offers more than the cabin is worth, ask yourself why." Mason stared at the sentence. $10 million. The offer suddenly felt less generous and more suspicious. Gunnar nudged the album with his nose. A small key slid from between the pages and landed on the floorboards. Mason picked it up immediately. It was old brass, worn smooth from years of use. A tiny tag remained attached. Greenhouse. Mason looked toward the locked hallway door. "Emily," he murmured, "what were you trying to show me?" As if answering the question, Gunnar raced toward the hallway. The dog stopped in front of the greenhouse door and barked sharply. This time, Mason noticed something he had missed before. Fresh dirt on the floor beneath the door. Dirt that had not been there earlier. Someone had been inside recently, and when he inserted the key into the lock, he heard footsteps moving somewhere on the other side. The sound lasted only a second. One step, maybe two, then silence returned. Mason froze with his hand still on the key. Gunnar's ears snapped forward. The German shepherd let out a low growl and stared at the door. "You heard it too," Mason whispered. Slowly, he turned the key. The old lock clicked. The greenhouse door creaked open a few inches. Warm sunlight streamed through glass panels overhead. Rows of flowers filled the room. Roses, lilies, lavender. Everything was perfectly maintained. Too perfectly. Emily had been gone for weeks. Yet not a single plant looked neglected. Mason pushed the door open farther. "Hello," he called. No answer. Gunnar entered first, moving cautiously between the rows. Mason followed. The greenhouse was larger than he remembered. Nearly 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. Shelves lined the walls. Gardening tools hung neatly from hooks. Watering cans sat exactly where Emily would have left them. Yet something felt wrong. Gunnar suddenly stopped beside a workbench in the corner. His nose moved rapidly. Mason walked over. On the bench sat a ceramic flower pot. Fresh soil surrounded it. Mason touched the dirt. It was damp. Very damp. Someone had watered it recently. "That is impossible," he muttered. A folded piece of paper rested beneath the pot. His pulse quickened. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Emily's. "If you found this, it means Gunnar led you here." Mason stared at the sentence. A chill ran through him. "You knew he would find this?" he asked quietly. Gunnar glanced back as if hearing his name. The note continued, "Do not trust the offers. Do not trust the people asking questions. The flowers are not the secret." Mason read the line twice. "The flowers are not the secret." Before he could continue, a vehicle engine echoed from outside. He immediately moved toward the greenhouse window. A white pickup truck had pulled into the driveway. An older woman stepped out carrying a basket. Gunnar stopped growling. Instead, his tail moved slightly. Mason frowned. "You know her?" A few minutes later, he met the woman on the porch. She appeared to be in her late 60s. Silver hair, denim jacket, kind eyes. The basket contained fresh bread and vegetables. "You must be Mason Hale," she said. "I am Ruth Parker. I live about a mile down the road." Mason nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." Ruth smiled sadly. "Emily talked about you all the time." The words hit harder than he expected. Ruth glanced toward the greenhouse. Her expression changed. "So you opened it." Mason noticed the shift immediately. "You knew about that room?" Ruth hesitated. Everyone knew about the flowers. Nobody knew what she was really doing in there. Mason's attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" Ruth looked toward the mountains. The last year of her life, Emily spent more time searching than gardening. Searching for what? Ruth opened her mouth to answer, but stopped. Her eyes suddenly fixed on the road. A black SUV was climbing the hill again. Richard Sloane had returned. Ruth's face lost all color. "Mason," she said quietly, "if that man is back already, then whatever Emily discovered is much bigger than I thought." At that exact moment, Gunnar sprinted toward the dead rosebush and began digging harder than ever before. The moment Gunnar started digging, Mason forgot about the SUV. Dirt flew behind the German shepherd as he worked furiously around the dead rosebush. Ruth stepped closer, her eyes wide. "That dog has been doing that for years," she said quietly. Mason looked up. "Years?" Ruth nodded. "Not every visit, but whenever Emily came here, he always stopped at that exact spot." Gunnar suddenly struck something solid. The sound was unmistakable. Wood. Mason dropped to one knee and cleared away the loose dirt with his hands. Within seconds, the corner of a small weathered box appeared beneath the roots. "Well, I will be damned," Ruth whispered. Gunnar backed away, tail moving slowly, as if he knew his job was finished. Mason carefully lifted the box from the ground. It was old cedar, sealed with a brass latch darkened by time. Before he could open it, the sound of a car door closing echoed across the driveway. Richard Sloane was already walking toward them. Mr. Hale, he called. I hope I am not interrupting. Mason immediately slipped the box behind his leg. Sloane's smile remained perfectly calm. I realized I may have come across too aggressively earlier. I wanted to improve my offer. Ruth folded her arms. That was quick. Sloane barely acknowledged her. $15 million, he said. Cash transaction. No delays. Mason stared at him. You are offering $15 million for a flower cabin you claim is just another piece of land. Sloane's smile tightened slightly. The market is unpredictable. That is not an answer. For the first time, Sloane looked uncomfortable, only for a second. Then the expression vanished. Think it over, he replied. Opportunities like this rarely come twice. Gunnar stepped between Mason and Sloane. The dog did not growl. He simply stood there watching. Sloane glanced down at him. Your dog seems to dislike me. He usually has good instincts, Mason answered. Sloane chuckled politely and returned to his SUV. This time he drove away without another word. Silence settled over the property. Ruth exhaled slowly. Emily was right. Mason looked at her. About what? Whatever she found, somebody is desperate to keep hidden. Mason lowered his eyes to the cedar box. Carefully, he opened the latch. Inside rested a stack of photographs, a folded county map, and a small journal. The first photograph showed a group of children standing outside an old building deep in the mountains. The image appeared decades old. The second photograph showed the same location abandoned. The third contained a handwritten note attached to the back. Mason's heartbeat quickened as he read it aloud. The children were never forgotten. Someone simply wanted everyone to believe they were. Ruth covered her mouth. Oh my God. Mason opened the journal. The first page contained Emily's handwriting. If you're reading this, Mason, I finally found the place. But the truth is bigger than I imagined. He turned the page. Every line after that described names, dates, records, and interviews. Investors shook their heads. Emily had spent years investigating something hidden in these mountains. Then a folded map slipped from the journal and landed on the ground. A red circle had been drawn around a location nearly 7 miles from the cabin. Beside it, Emily had written 3 words. Start here. At that exact moment, Gunnar lifted his head toward the forest beyond the flower fields and barked sharply at something neither Mason nor Ruth could see. Gunnar barked again toward the tree line. His body rigid, Mason followed the dog's gaze but saw only shadows stretching across the mountainside as the afternoon sun dropped lower. Ruth stepped closer to him. Do you think somebody is out there? Mason folded the map and journal carefully. After today, I think that is a safer assumption than believing nobody is. Gunnar moved several feet toward the forest and stopped, waiting. Mason recognized the behavior immediately. The dog wanted him to follow. That location is 7 miles away, Mason said, looking at the red circle on Emily's map. If she marked it, it mattered. Ruth glanced nervously toward the road. Then you should go before somebody else gets there first. Within 20 minutes, Mason had packed water, flashlights, the journal, and the map into a backpack. The trail began behind the cabin, winding through dense pine forest and rocky hillsides. Gunnar stayed several steps ahead, moving with purpose. As they climbed higher, Mason continued reading sections of Emily's journal during short breaks. The entries became more personal, less like research notes and more like warnings. One page caught his attention immediately. Some people know I am getting close. If anything happens to me, the answers are near the old school. Mason stopped walking. Old school? He murmured. He checked the map again. The red circle sat beside faded words barely visible on the paper. Cedar Ridge School. Gunnar suddenly stopped and sniffed the air. A moment later, the dog turned sharply off the trail. What is it? Mason asked. Gunnar moved downhill through thick brush. Mason followed. After nearly 100 yards, they emerged beside a rusted mailbox hidden among overgrown weeds. There was no house nearby, only the mailbox. Mason frowned. Why would there be a mailbox out here? Gunnar nudged the post with his nose. Something rattled inside. Mason opened the small metal door. A folded envelope rested within. His heart immediately began racing. The handwriting belonged to Emily. No way, he whispered. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. Mason, if you found this, Gunnar is doing exactly what I hoped he would. Trust him. He knows more than you realize. Mason smiled despite himself. I think you gave this dog more responsibility than most people get. Gunnar sat beside him, watching quietly. The letter continued. Do not stop at the school. The school only points toward the truth. Look beneath what everyone else ignored. Mason folded the paper. Beneath what everyone ignored, he repeated. The words made no sense yet. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, they finally reached the location marked on the map. The remains of Cedar Ridge School stood alone in a clearing. The building had been abandoned for decades. Broken windows reflected the fading light. Weathered wood creaked softly in the wind. Mason stared at it in silence. Emily spent years looking for this place. Gunnar suddenly trotted past the front entrance. Instead of approaching the building, he headed toward a grassy field behind it. Then he began digging beside an old stone marker, nearly hidden by weeds. As dirt scattered away, the top of a metal hatch slowly emerged from the ground. The metal hatch looked as if nobody had touched it in 50 years. Rust covered the surface. Thick grass had nearly swallowed its edges. Mason knelt beside it and brushed away the remaining dirt. Gunnar stood close, watching every movement. "You knew it was here, did you not?" Mason asked. The dog responded with a soft huff and sat down beside the opening. Mason grabbed the handle and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then the old seal finally broke with a groan. Cool air drifted upward from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared underground. Mason switched on his flashlight. "Emily," he whispered. "What were you chasing?" He descended carefully. The stairs led nearly 20 feet beneath the field before opening into a surprisingly large room. Concrete walls surrounded shelves filled with dusty boxes. Filing cabinets lined one side. A wooden desk stood untouched in the center. Mason slowly turned in a circle. "This is not a storage room." Gunnar walked ahead and stopped beside the desk. On top rested a single folder. Unlike everything else underground, it was clean, recently handled. Mason opened it. His breath caught immediately. Inside were copies of school records, property deeds, newspaper articles, and dozens of handwritten notes. Every document pointed toward the same story. Decades earlier, Cedar Ridge School had quietly closed after financial troubles. Officially, the children had been relocated. Unofficially, many records had vanished. Names disappeared. Families never received answers. Entire histories had been erased. Mason sat down heavily. This is what Emily was investigating. He turned another page, then another. Every page revealed months of research, interviews, maps, photographs, questions. At the very bottom rested a sealed envelope addressed directly to him. Mason opened it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Mason, if you are reading this, then Gunnar found the truth exactly as I hoped he would. I never wanted this burden to belong to you, but I knew I might not have enough time to finish." Mason swallowed hard and continued reading. "The people trying to buy the cabin do not care about the flowers. They care about the land beneath it. Years ago, records from Cedar Ridge were hidden there. Somebody has spent decades making sure nobody finds them." Mason's eyes widened. The cabin. Suddenly, everything connected. The offers, the warnings, the greenhouse, the dead rosebush. Emily continued. "The final proof is still hidden. I could never locate it, but I know where to look next." Mason reached the bottom of the letter and froze. There, attached with a paperclip, was a photograph. The image showed Emily standing beside an elderly man he had never seen before. Written across the back was a name, Thomas Whitaker, last surviving witness. Gunnar suddenly growled, not loudly, just enough to make Mason look up. The dog was staring toward the staircase. A second later, footsteps echoed faintly from above. Someone else had found the hatch. The footsteps above stopped. Silence filled the underground room. Mason slowly folded Emily's letter and slipped it into his jacket. Gunnar remained fixed on the staircase, every muscle tense. Then a familiar voice drifted down from above. "Mr. Hale, Richard Sloan." Mason exchanged a glance with Gunnar. "Of course it is him," he muttered. Sloan's voice came again. "I know you are down there. We should talk." Mason carefully gathered the folder and documents into his backpack. "Funny," he called back. "My wife spent years warning me not to." A short laugh echoed from above. Emily misunderstood a lot of things. That sentence alone told Mason everything he needed to know. Emily had never trusted this man. Gunnar let out a low growl. Sloan sighed. "Look, Mr. Hale, there is no reason to make this difficult. You have already won. The cabin is yours. The money is yours. Walk away from whatever you found and everyone leaves happy." Mason stared at the staircase. "Everyone?" he asked. "That depends on your definition." No answer came immediately. Then Sloane spoke more carefully. Some stories belong in the past. Mason felt anger rising for the first time since arriving at the cabin. Not explosive anger, the quiet kind, the kind that settled deep. Those children had names, he replied. Their families deserved answers. Another pause. Then Sloane's tone changed completely. You sound exactly like Emily. Mason tightened his grip on the backpack. Good. Silence followed. Several seconds later, footsteps retreated from the hatch. A vehicle engine started in the distance. Then it faded away. Gunnar continued watching the stairs. I do not think he is coming back tonight, Mason said. The dog finally relaxed. An hour later, they returned to the cabin. Darkness had settled across the mountains. Ruth was waiting on the porch. The moment she saw Mason, she stood. What happened? Mason handed her the photograph of Thomas Whitaker. Ruth nearly dropped it. I know him. Mason froze. You do? Everybody thought he moved away years ago. Where is he? Ruth pointed toward the northern ridge visible through the trees. About 12 miles from here. Small ranch. Lives alone. Mason felt his pulse quicken. Emily's final witness. The missing piece. Ruth lowered her voice. If Thomas is still alive, he knows the truth. Mason sat heavily on the porch steps. For the first time, everything felt painfully clear. Emily had not spent years chasing money. She had spent years protecting a story that somebody wanted erased. The flower cabin had never been the destination. It had been a breadcrumb, a trail, a way to lead him here if she could not finish the journey herself. Gunnar walked over and rested his head against Mason's shoulder. Mason smiled sadly and scratched behind the dog's ears. You knew, did not you? The German shepherd looked up at him calmly. Ruth watched them both. What are you going to do now? Mason stared toward the dark mountains. Then he looked down at Emily's final photograph. Thomas Whitaker smiled faintly from the picture beside her. The last witness, the last answer. Mason stood. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, we finish what Emily started. At that exact moment, a folded piece of paper slipped from behind the photograph and landed at his feet. Written across it in Emily's handwriting were 5 words. Thomas is only the beginning. The next morning arrived beneath a clear Montana sky. Mason and Gunnar left before sunrise, following the winding mountain road toward Thomas Whitaker's ranch. The old property sat alone beneath towering pines, hidden from the world. When they arrived, an elderly man stood on the porch, holding a coffee mug. He looked at Mason for a long moment before his eyes settled on the photograph. Emily sent you, he said quietly. Mason nodded. I think she did. Thomas invited them inside. The small cabin walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents stretching back decades. Gunnar immediately walked to a wooden cabinet in the corner and sat beside it. Thomas noticed and smiled faintly. That dog reminds me of her. Mason looked surprised. Emily brought him here? Thomas nodded. Many times. He sat down heavily in an old chair. She was the first person in 40 years who refused to stop asking questions. For the next 2 hours, Thomas told the story nobody had wanted remembered. Cedar Ridge School had quietly closed after powerful local investors purchased the surrounding land. Records were altered. Families were misled. Important documents disappeared. The children were eventually relocated, but the truth about what happened was buried beneath legal agreements and forgotten files. People lost their history, Thomas said. Not their lives, their history, their names, their connection to where they came from. Mason finally understood. Emily had never been chasing a scandal. She had been trying to restore forgotten stories to the families who deserved them. Thomas opened the cabinet Gunnar had found. Inside rested the final records Emily had searched for. Original enrollment books, letters, property transfers. Everything needed to prove the truth. Mason stared at the boxes. This is what they wanted hidden. Thomas nodded. And this is why they wanted your cabin. 3 weeks later, the County Historical Society held a public meeting. Families filled the room. Journalists attended. Local officials listened as Mason carefully presented Emily's research, Thomas's records, and the documents hidden beneath the mountains. No accusations, no anger, just the truth. One by one, families discovered answers they had spent decades searching for. Old photographs were returned. Lost records were restored. Forgotten names were recognized again. When the meeting ended, people approached Mason with tears in their eyes and gratitude in their voices. But every time someone thanked him, Mason pointed toward a framed photograph of Emily displayed beside the records. She did the hard part, he said. Months later, the flower cabin remained exactly where it had always stood. The offers stopped coming. The mystery was gone. The truth was finally public. Part of the property became a small historical center dedicated to preserving the stories Emily had uncovered. Visitors arrived from across the state. On a warm summer afternoon, Mason sat on the porch, watching the flowers sway in the breeze. Gunnar rested beside him, older now, but still alert. A bronze plaque near the garden carried a simple inscription, in honor of Emily Hale, who chose truth over comfort and remembrance over silence. Mason smiled as he looked across the fields of blooming roses. "You finished it, Emily," he said softly. Gunnar lifted his head and wagged his tail once. The cabin had been worth millions, but the truth she left behind was worth far more. And for the first time since losing her, Mason felt something he thought he might never feel again. Peace. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might enjoy it too. We would love to know where you are watching from. Tell us your city and country in the comments. More heartfelt and unforgettable hero dog stories are already waiting for you. See you in the next one.